green skin, pointy ears, large nose, and sharp teeth. Goblins. They have taken on an almost cult status, tracing their roots back to different stories, myths, and legends, from the ancient world to the Middle Ages, changing in style, appearance, and characteristics that vary from country, region, and even town to town of Europe. Even in the African Zulu mythology, with the creature named the Tokoloshe, to the once isolationist island of Japan, having the mysterious water-dwelling creatures called the Kappas, equal parts turtle and hobo, all similar creatures that are rooted in the shared heritage and folklore superstitions that captivate our imagination. The traditional common portrayal is that of a mischievous, cunning, malevolent creature with red eyes concealed in the shadows, and is blamed for the cause of bad luck. Goblins have such a set of recognisable physical characteristics that they even have a species of shark appropriately named after them, the goblin shark. And it's not only the looks that they share, as these rare sharks tend to inhabit deep sea canyons and the cracks of the continental slopes, and much like goblins, use ambush tactics to hunt their prey. Although the history is obscure, it's believed goblins can be traced back to pre-Roman France and Germany, lands that were dotted with dark ancient woodlands and were inhabited with a fiercely independent tribal people, and the biased Roman accounts labelled these as backward barbarians. But it was the very same people's mysticism and pagan ideals that drew up these creatures and where the tales originate from. We explore the unknown origins of these creatures and delve into different myths and legends that surround them, and why do some people and communities still believe they exist today. The earliest roots of the goblin origins can be traced back to ancient Celtic and Germanic peoples around the Stone Age, where people formed in tribes and maintained a primordial connection with nature, the wilderness, and the elements. A belief in magic and evil spirits was commonplace, and folk tales which were exchanged over a crackling fire, passed down through generations, were carried far over the horizon. These people worshipped a pantheon of different gods and goddesses, with a belief that the forests were alive with elemental spirits referred to as the little peoples, ranging from elves, goblins, or even the fair folk or fairy folk. It's thought the green skin element derives from the green camouflage to blend into the trees and foliage of the wilderness. Most likely this is where the leprechaun came from, with Ireland still retaining a lot of its Celtic heritage and identity after Britain slowly assimilated with its various Saxon, Norman and Viking occupiers through history. It was said the Celts blamed goblins for all manner of misfortunes that they did not fully understand or truly grasp, such as infertility, crop failure, or even people being born with disfigurements. To ward off this evil and other spirits that would seek to do them harm, this is where the tradition of hanging horseshoes over the front doors of the home originated from. These resembled the Celtic moon god's crescent and had a religious layer on top of folklore superstition, with this practice still remaining today in the UK, which can be seen with the horseshoe on old-style cottages and homes in the countryside, keeping them safe from the goblins. The word goblin comes from the Greek word gobulus, meaning rogue or imp. The German word for them is kobold, its root word meaning hollow in rock or earth, which fits their token-esque description of underground dwelling creatures. However, the Germanic koboldoid goblins are believed to be more spirits than physical creatures, an example of how beliefs differ from country to country. So are goblins evil? It depends on the various types, which we'll soon discuss, that range from being good, evil or neutral. They are more commonly described as tricksters, who commit mischief, being blamed as a source of bad luck. It could also be argued that goblins are modelled as an extension on human characteristics that we try to downplay in our day-to-day observations. Many times, however, they are shown to be spiteful. If gifts are not bestowed, or helpfulness not rewarded, this may lead to suffering at their mercy. Often offerings will be left for them, such as food or trinkets for work and good luck. Perhaps this is where the Santa Claus tradition of leaving food out comes from, as some scholars believe Santa comes from a red psychedelic mushroom, providing the link to the little peoples, or to some people, even the ability to see them, whilst hallucinating on them. with the altering perceptions. Whether these legends originated from stories simply to frighten children, or evolved from the ancient pre-Christian religious beliefs, such as how the pagans left offerings to the gods and spirits. The tales of the jinns in Arabian culture and myths have a similar connection to goblins. Sally Promley from the University of Yale also makes this connection in her book, Sensational Religion, Sensory Cultures in Material Practice. She points out that although the major difference is a goblin is more of a blanket term that has devolved over different regions to loosely mean the same creature, the jinn holds a central belief, being a creature made of fire and existing in its own dimension, although there are many strange accounts of jinn possessions in humans, which connects more closely with a Western figure of a demon than a goblin. But nevertheless, tales of different beings that interact with humans, often unseen to the naked eye, are commonplace in humanity's consciousness the world over. When the strict puritanical religious cloak fell over Europe and began the purging to cleanse anything that threatened the church and the supreme rule of the organisation, denouncing many of the native pagan legends of Europe. Here goblins, demons and ghosts were all grouped together as unholy and a heretical threat to the church. From the mines of Cornwall to the sand dunes of Holland, the fords of Norway and highlands of Scotland, you do not have to look far for tales of goblins. Their heritage lives on through the naming of places all around the world, such as Goblin State Park in Utah or Goblin Combe in Somerset. One of the most eerie named locations is the Goblin Swamp in southwest Australia. It's interesting to see how even in this remote corner of the world that the myths of the goblin carried on with the settlers travelling to Australia. The old forest here has also been named Goblin Forest, resembling something of a dark fantasy setting with old twisted trees and curious shapes as far as the eye can see, channeling a strong supernatural, otherworldly style. To most people, goblins are resigned to the world of fantasy and imagination, but to others, they are grouped in the same mysterious world of sightings of aliens, ghosts and other weird creatures. A minority in Europe, especially Iceland and some Scandinavian towns, still tell tales and believe in elves, goblins and trolls, respecting their traditions and the wild landscapes of their countries. A strong example of this mass belief in goblins, demons and other superstitious entities takes us to rural Africa. In 2013, the head teacher of Lushumbi Primary School in Zimbabwe explained how classes were stopped when 4 girls claimed to be attacked by goblins. He told the press the whole school is affected, and these attacks cause panic. Even some parents have stopped sending their children to attend classes for fear of these goblin attacks. Belief in witchcraft plays a strong part of life in the villages of Zimbabwe. A businessman from the capital even reached out to the government to remove goblins from his gold mine in the Shamva region of the country. Now goblin exorcisms are being carried out, even reaching some suburbs of the capital. It was reported that the Cowdray Park has been infested by goblins that terrorise residents. Many critics, however, say this is a cash grab by the leading witch hunter elders, charging a fee of up to $800 to cast out a goblin. Or perhaps this is a shared hysteria, as a strange video that was shared of one of these alleged goblin attacks, but tellingly, no goblins can be seen throughout it. And human psychology explains, if you see a crowd of people in mass hysteria and distress running away, most of the time you'll run too. Weighing through the hysteria, Zimbabwe does have a history of strange going-ons. This is echoed in the now infamous account that took off in world news, taking place in Ariel School, Ruwa, Zimbabwe in 1994, where 62 children reported seeing a disc-shaped UFO and aliens described with big black eyes. Perhaps these reports of little green goblins are more of an outer world nature rather than wicked spirits. Goblins had long enjoyed the cultural breakthrough in mainstream consciousness, appearing in games, books, films and television. Out of all the monsters and mythical beasts from our folklore, goblins hold one of the most popular spots. Instantly recognisable from Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter and even the Spider-Man villain, the Green Goblin, played by William Dafoe, who must be said has very goblin-like features. Sorry, William.
Am I?
And also, let's not get into the weird, creepy subtext behind goblins appearing in the movie Labyrinth, starring David Bowie as a Goblin King, who attempts to kidnap the main character, a young girl, to take her away to Goblin Land to remain forever.
Everything I've done for you.
Perhaps this is just a rehash of how modern fairy tales are based on old German folk tales. Once the fairy tale surface is scratched, it reveals the origins of a much more darker setting. In the 1970s cult horror film, Don't Be Afraid of the Dark, we see a newlywed couple moving into the old Gothic style house, the type that looks creepy even on the outside. The goblins from the cellar began to harass the main female character, scaring and terrorising her, to the point her husband and friends think she is simply being hysterical and emotional. This shows the representation of goblins often varies from what culture, time period or setting it takes place in, evolving from the mischievous spirits to evil creatures bent on harm and terror. Countless authors continue to alter and tinker with the memory and imagination, writing about goblins in all forms of fiction, while still appearing in most fantasy games, often being a playable race. They even have a deeper cultural representation in our subconsciousness, often appearing as a symbol of rebellion, mischief, and representing an outsider vibe. We see this in the form of the American death metal band Necro Goblin, who adopted them for their namesake, appearing in their music videos and even live gig performances. Other examples include the alternative rapper Tyler the Creator, naming his studio album Goblin and including them on the artwork. This carries the same energy as one of the biggest rock and roll icons of rebellion and counterculture, that of the devil or Satan, used by heavy metal rock bands and the biker gangs alike, channeling the outlaw alternative identity. There are countless variants of goblins, surprisingly found all over with different cultures and lands. So let's take a look at some of the most famous and some of the not so famous types. Inhabiting ruined castles and forts, drawn to tyranny or evil deeds, the Redcap is often represented as one of the most vicious and violent types of goblin. Based around the Anglo-Scottish border, a place that has seen many bloody battles and clashes through history, the Redcap gets its name from the blood-soaked hood it wore, said to be stained red from its victims. It was the evil character named Robin Redcap who acted as a twisted sidekick to the Lord of Hermitage Castle, who was a practitioner of black magic, as far as a legend goes. He was boiled alive by the locals, and even in death is said to still haunt the remains of Hermitage Castle in Scotland. Brownies exist in countless different poems and stories, coming mainly from Scottish folklore. The brownie is a household type of domesticated spirit, said to only come out at night to perform its jobs and chores. On pondering why there is such an emphasis on why these creatures always perform jobs, the folklorist L.F. Newman alludes to the fact that the master of the house could intimidate their servants or even children to perform these roles for punishment of the brownies. Brownies were mostly thought to be harmless unless angered. It was the Scottish King James who described brownies as demons in his infamous book named The Demonology. It's also remarked that during their work in the kitchens they created chocolate brownies, where the name comes from. It's also said the character Dobby from Harry Potter is modelled after the brownies, being a servant bound to a master. Like the brownies, knockers are supposed to be both mischievous and malevolent creatures who knock deep underground to lead the miners of Cornwall to tin. That's if they're fed well. If not, they were said to punish miners by causing random avalanches or collapses, leading them to their doom. Even though this was folklore superstition, there have been several recorded knocks and strange vibrations or echoes from the mines, although usually attributed to strange geological phenomenon than angry subterranean entities. The tales of the knockers even spread to America and evolved into the Tommy knockers, with the author Stephen King using them in one of his horror novels. In the 17th century, imps were believed to be demons or associates of the devil. Originally they were regarded in the same manner as goblins, not being inherently evil, but often mischievous and cunning, with the added characteristics of being wild and uncontrollable, feral spirits who cannot be tamed and act to their own accord. Legend has it there is still one encased in Lincoln Cathedral, the UK, after being trapped in stone, with imps alongside gargoyles regularly being depicted in Gothic architecture around the world. During the Christianization of Western Europe, imps were transformed from attention-seeking pranksters into satanic minions. Because sorcery was deemed satanical, imps were hunted alongside witches, believing they took the shape of black cats, rats or toads within the service of a witch, and many innocent men and women were put to trial because they were seen in the presence of an imp. Another type of goblin in legends is that of the Boggart, often being attributed to coming out at night when people are fast asleep, and unlike the common household trickster, these were thought to dwell in lonely bogs, swamps or under bridges, like the Scandinavian troll, visiting homes at night to wreak havoc. The Boggart has a chilling part in Lancashire folklore and has countless tales that are still told to this day. This is kept alive today, such as Boggart Hole Clough in Manchester, taking its name from these creatures. People through the centuries have reported strange happenings, whispering through the trees, and even missing pets and some humans taking place in these very woods. Spirgans are relatively unknown outside of West Cornwall and were depicted as grotesquely ugly, wizened old men with large childlike heads. They were said to be found at old ruins, cliffs and barrows, guarding buried treasure. Although small, they were usually considered to be the ghosts of ancient giants that inhabited the lands of ancient Cornwall. Spirgans were notorious for their unpleasant dispositions and delighted in working mischief against those who offended them. A Spirggan can be found today, not in the rugged coast of Cornwall, but in London, in Parkland Walk. This statue, sculptured by Marilyn Collins, stepping out from the arched brickwork of a footbridge, was inspired by the urban legends of a goat man that haunted this area of London around the 70s and 80s. The Cali cancer rose is a seasonal creature that comes out in the winter from its underground dwelling, avoiding the movement of the sunlight, being creatures of the night. These originate in Greece, Bulgaria and the Balkan states, and so the tale goes, they remain deep within the earth, chewing at the roots of the world tree to cause the planet to collapse in on itself. But each time they come out, once a year at Christmas, the world tree heals itself, and so continues the cycle. It's interesting that even in this area of the world, the stories are still commonplace of malicious creatures dwelling deep underground. The last one to give an honourable shout out to are the hobgoblins, again depicted as mischievous and playing practical jokes on humans. One even appears in the William Shakespeare play with the character of Puck in A Midsummer's Night Dream. In the UK, there is a famous and popular beer brewed named Hobgoblin by the Witchwood Brewery, who produce other folk-inspired ales and beverages. The world is an ancient place, filled with superstition and deep folklore, where we once looked into the darkness of the shadows that breathed life into our imaginations for answers. Now we look to the darkness of the nighttime sky, with superstitions and the supernatural spotlight shining to aliens, UFOs and otherworldly entities. The photo here is covered in another video on the channel of the alleged Ilkley Moor alien. At one point in history, this would have been referred to as a goblin or a boggart. After exploring the history, superstition is still upheld in many parts of the world, and all we can really say for sure is that the memory of the goblins is not yet ready to fade away into the darkness and out of existence. This is Blue Moon, Mysteries Explained.